Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University.
Hello friends, welcome to Chaitanya Studio at Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University, Ahmedabad. Myself, Dr. Vinod L. Desai, working at Department of Computer Science and Technology, Sardar Patel University, Vidyanagar. In previous sessions, we talked about various property and its attributes of CSS to make the content of the web page attractive. Now, for adding the extra value to this web page designing, we will discuss various pseudo elements in this session. So there are various kind of pseudo elements available in CSS which will help us to dynamically add and modify the contents of this web page during execution as well as and when required. So at the end of these sessions, you will have a clear-cut understanding of pseudo elements and its importance and how it can be used in our web page. So now let's have a look at pseudo elements. The CSS pseudo element is primarily a keyword added to CSS selector that lets you to style a specific part of the selected HTML element. That means we can select a specific HTML element and upon that we can apply this element effect. It acts as a sub-element and provide additional functionality to the selected entity. Okay, so as we said that it adds additional functionality, extra value to the web page. Pseudo elements were first introduced in 2015 with a single colon syntax. Okay, so you might find it somewhere in books or in other material that the pseudo elements would be started or defined with a single colon sign as shown over here, that selector colon pseudo element, okay, and then after the various property and its value in a curly braces. So this was the syntax used with a CSS version 2, but now in CSS version 3 the syntax is changed from single colon to double colon. So now if you are providing a pseudo element effect, you have to write selectors, then double colon and then pseudo element, and in curly brackets you have to provide various property and its values. Okay, so the double colon keyword are our pseudo elements that also indicates their functionality by their names. So there are various, we can say, okay, pseudo elements available, but before that we need to understand the difference between pseudo classes and pseudo elements. A pseudo class is a state of the selected element when it goes through an event or series of events. You can change the element style for a particular event with pseudo class. Okay, so with pseudo class we can change the style for a particular event of a particular element. While in contrast, a CSS pseudo element behaves like a sub element itself and adds a different functionality to the selected element based on its type. Okay, so this is the little bit difference among the pseudo classes and pseudo elements. Now there are different pseudo elements available latest CSS versions and it is supported by modern latest browsers. The pseudo elements are before, after, first letter, first line, marker, placeholder, selection, first selected button, part, slotted, and each pseudo element has its own meaning and value in our CSS properties. Now moving next, let's discuss each one with a much detailed manner. So first let's go for the before pseudo element. Now the before keyword creates a pseudo element that appears just before the content of the selected HTML element. By default, it has an inline display and needs to be provided with the CSS content property to function. Okay, so by default what happens, it is inline. Okay, so we can't visualize it, but once it is used and we can say with a proper pseudo element with a CSS effect content property, then it will be reflected on the web page. Okay, let's go for that practically so that we can understand in more better way. One by one we will see, so that we have all the pseudo elements in our applications, but we will see each one in better way. So what I will do is I will simply take all other the pseudo elements from the program and I will put it in another blank file. So and we will take it as and when required with different pseudo elements. Okay. So now moving back to our original program, pseudo elements. Okay, so this is our original document. We have a style tag, within that a body selector is used, and then after we are using a pseudo selectors paragraph with a before pseudo element. Okay, so for the paragraph we are applying a before pseudo elements. Our main selector is paragraph, okay, element selectors, and for that we are using a before pseudo element. In our document contains one header 2, one paragraph is there, one division is there, okay, block having a class p1, okay, and then after we have unordered list and then placeholder for the text input. Input we have already used a file control as well, okay, for different pseudo elements, but now we are talking about the before. So what the before does actually, okay, let me to even take it back and Control X, I am saving it and just try to run first. So how our HTML document looks, our web page looks like this, okay. So this is what before element it displays. It's simply the message or content we have displayed on our web page. See here, this header 2, okay, header 2, but it is not reflecting any kind with a pseudo element because we haven't provided any pseudo elements. Now we are providing a pseudo elements in our style tag like this, okay. We want some content to be added before a paragraph element as shown over here. We are providing what? So we are just providing a before pseudo elements for the page selectors, element selectors, and what we need to do, we need to add certain content like this, I am added, or you can write any message that can reflect that addition of a content before the particular selectors. Let's say India is a leader of democracy. Any content you want just for testing purpose, okay. Democracy. India is a leader of democracy that we want to add before the paragraph and in a red color, and you can set the property of the font size as per your requirement. You can set the content in a we can say as a image also as if you want it, okay. So the content property is there. Now let's update or reflect the changes on our web page, okay. Now we have added the before, we have used the before pseudo element, okay. So for the paragraph 1, now we will just refresh it. Now you can see the content has been added dynamically during runtime, okay. So this is the power of how I can say pseudo elements. So India is a leader of democracy that is added before the specified element selectors. As we have set the element selector is a paragraph, okay. So the content would be set or added before this paragraph element selectors. So this is what the before pseudo element is, okay. Then after we have another pseudo element is after, the opposite to before, okay. Simply the after pseudo element works just like before, except for the fact that instead of appearing before, it appears just after the content of the selected HTML element. Like before, after has an inline display by default and takes a content property to function, okay. Same thing as you can define anyone for the after. So now let's test practically for the after. So we have already defined it, so just try to get it back from the after. So we have again the same for the paragraph, we are using this. Let me to take all so that, and we will comment it. Okay, right now we are interested in after. Okay, the same thing we can make a modification in our programs. Okay, instead of before we will write after, so you can easily understand how it is reflected. Okay, so for the same paragraph we want the content to be added after. It's the process is a little bit slow, so it takes times to locate the cursor. We set change it to after. Okay, save it and refresh the page and see what changes it takes place. So now the content is added at the end of the paragraph. Okay, instead of before, the after pseudo element is applied. So this way the before and after pseudo element helps us to add the content or object on a web page. The next pseudo element is first letter. Applies styles to the first letter of the first line of a block level element. Make it very clear. It applies style to the first letter of the first line of a block level element, but only when not preceded by other content such as image or inline tables. Doing so may sound tricky, but first letter pseudo element in CSS makes it relatively simple. It represents the first letter of the first line of a block element and only works if the first child of the targeted element is a text block. Okay, it must be a text block. Here is how easy it is to target the first letter of all the paragraph tags and make them appear a bit bolder than in weight. Bit bolder in weight. Okay, we can set the weight of a first letter of a paragraph. We can heavy weight in terms of larger one. Okay, so this is what we set it. Let's try to understand through the practical one. Now we will do what? Just remove the paragraph. Okay, and we will get a first letter. So that we can easily understand how pseudo element first letter of all the paragraphs gets reflected. We will just copy it and put it in our mail. Okay, just put it over here. So what we have provided in a first letter pseudo element for each paragraph selectors, we have just set the color red, font size to 30 pixels and font weight to bold. Okay, so let's save it. Okay, go to the browser. So initially it was looking like this as we have set after pseudo elements. Now just refresh it to see the first letter. So our first letter of doctor, a D is, we can say, set with a much bolder weight. You can set the size even much, instead of 30 you can set it to 50. Okay, so it will be like this. So this is the power of, we can say, first letter pseudo element. Next, the first line pseudo element applies style to the first line of a block level element. Note that the length of the first line depends on many factors, including the width of the element, the width of the document, and the font size of the text. Note that only a few properties are applied to first line pseudo element, like font properties, color properties, background properties, word spacing, letter spacing, text decoration, vertical align, text transform, text height, clean, etc. So let's have a look for the first line. The code above, that means we have set a property font weight to 100. So this will do what? Make the first line of every paragraph element bolder in weight. So it will be applied for all the paragraphs, first line. Okay, so let's go for the first line, pseudo element. Below that, first line is there. We'll take it, see. And we will place it on the first letter. So what it does, simply text decorations we have transform is uppercase, then color is red. Now just refresh the page. As you can see, the first line of the paragraph, okay, it transformed to a capital and with a red letter, So this is what the first line pseudo element is. You can have any other, we can say, property as mentioned here. You can see here only a few properties are applied for first line pseudo elements like font property, color properties, background properties, word spacing, okay, letter spacing. You can set word spacing, letter spacing. Okay, let's test it. You can understand. Word spacing, you can have okay, let's test it, refresh it. See here, the word space is given by 3 pixels. You can improve it or extend it by 5. So you can set the specified properties for the first line pseudo elements like this, okay, and it is going to be reflected. So this is a first line pseudo element. Next is marker. Selects the marker box of a list item which typically contains a bullet or number. It works on any element or pseudo element set to display list items such as list, okay, elements. Let's try to understand this marker with an example. So let's go for the marker pseudo element. This one. Okay, we have already defined a list on which we will apply this marker. See. Now place it on the previously set pseudo element. Okay, let's paste it. So what we have done over here is that unordered list, and within that we have a, see, this is a element selector unordered list, and we have a descendant selectors li, okay, as element. Within that we already discussed selectors in previous session, so you need to understand this descendant selectors li. Then after a marker pseudo element is applied with a property of color blue and font size 30 pixels. For the all we can say a li, descendant li of ul list. So save it and reflect on the browser by just refreshing the page. So as we can see, the content of the list Ahmedabad, Gandhinagar, Vadodara, Surat and Anand is reflected with a specified property values. Okay, you can set the font size, maximize it, or even change the color as per our requirement. Okay, you can set instead of 30 pixels 50. So this way it is going to change. Okay, the next pseudo element is placeholder. The placeholder pseudo element allows you to style the placeholder of form input elements. Most browsers by default have light gray colored placeholders. So input is a selectors on which we have a pseudo element placeholder, and we can set the property as per our requirement for the color. Let's test it. Okay, we have a placeholder for the input selectors. Okay, take it back to our main program. Okay, just place on this. You can see here we have set color is equal to can. Okay, you can provide any color mechanism. We have discussed various color techniques to set colors on our content of a web page. You can use, but right now simply we are specifying the color can for our placeholder input, for the input selectors. Okay, right now see here the placeholder is having a default is a gray white something, and now refresh it. So it is having, see, you can set the, we can say color is in a cyan. So this way you can set the color. Instead of cyan you can set the red as well, any other colors you want to test. Just write down, save it and refresh it, so it will be displayed. So this is a, we can say a placeholder pseudo element. Next is selection pseudo element. It applies styles to the part of a document that has been highlighted by the user, such as clicking and dragging the mouse across the text. The selection pseudo element enables you to customize styles for this highlighting. Okay, let's go for that. So what it does, just simply it helps us. So whenever sometimes we need to drag or select the content on a web page. So whenever we are dragging or selecting any text on the web page, it must be highlighted so that we can come to know that this is what I have selected. So for search purpose, we can say selection pseudo element is used and it helps us to highlight such kind of things. Let's see practically how pseudo element selection works. Just copy it, put it over here. Okay, like this. So where we have applied it to the element having a class P1. Okay, s.p1 is mentioned. So where is class P1? Okay, on a division tag, as you can see. Okay, we have a division with a class P1. So on the content of this division, we will have the effect of selection pseudo elements. Okay, whenever we will drag or select the content of this division, its color, background color would be a red one. Okay, so let's go for that and check whether the selection pseudo element works and highlights the content that we are going to, we can say, select. Our division is this one, Department of Computer. Let me to select computer science. Okay, as you can see now, when I am selecting the content, the background color is set to red. So this is the power of a selection pseudo element, and you can set it and work with your web page. Next is file selection button pseudo element. The HTML file input element displays a button that seems impossible to style with CSS. To your surprise, the file selector button pseudo element actually lets you customize that button. Okay, so it allows us to customize the file selection button. The syntax would be input in a, we can say, box bracket type is equal to file. Then we have to specify this we can pseudo element of file selector button, and then after we can set the properties like background color or even color colon white value. You can specify as per your requirement. You might not like specifying the input type when adding styles to this pseudo element. Try to always mention the type to keep things readable for others. Let's test these things with a practical one so that we can have better understanding of this control as well. So input we already provided. Just select it, see. Instead of these selections, just paste it over here in our actual document. So what we did here, we are just adding a file selector button pseudo elements for our element selectors for the file control. Okay, input type is equal to file. For that the following effect is going to be reflected. Its padding is there, border width we set, border radius we set, background is set, color for the HSL value. Okay, then we can say transition is set. Okay, ease in out, then cursor is pointer, margin right is we can say 1 em, etc. So you can set the property as per your requirement. Okay, so now just save this. Okay, and refresh the browser. But initially see here how it looks like. Okay, it looks very simple. Now I am going to refresh it. So now you can see the choose file is we can say turned to a rounded corner along with the color and other properties we have provided for that. Okay, then after, so this is what the look of our file controls pseudo element. Then after you can click and then the file dialog will be opened, but we are not going to interact with that. We are interested in understanding these pseudo elements for the file selection control. Then the slotted pseudo element allows you to style the element that are placed inside of a slot element. Slots are used to distribute content inside of a web component. The slotted pseudo element can only be used inside of a shadow DOM. To use slotted, you would first need to create a template element and custom element. The template element would contain the slot element and the custom element would contain the template element. Once you have created the template element and the custom element, you can start styling the element that are placed inside of the slot element. To do this, you would use the slotted pseudo element in the CSS for the custom element. The slotted pseudo element represents an element that has a slot attribute on it. Unlike part pseudo element, the slotted pseudo element remains encapsulated in the style element in the web components template. The syntax for slotted element is like this: slotted in a bracket, it requires a compound selectors and the property you want to set. So in these sessions we have discussed various pseudo elements that helps us to design and provide a dynamic effects on various sub elements of the selectors. Okay, so by this way you can use any of the pseudo elements of your interest to be reflected on the web page. Thank you very much.